Tonight, we drift back to a time when bread was rough, beer was safer than water, and barley quietly ruled England while wheat sat sulking in the corner. You open your eyes to the sound of a wooden door groaning somewhere nearby, the sort of slow, uneven sound that means someone's been oiling the hinges with butter again. The air smells faintly of yeast, wood smoke, and rain-soaked thatch. It's morning, though in medieval England, morning just means there's slightly less dark than before. A cock crows from a distant yard, slightly out of tune, and you pull the coarse wool blanket a little tighter around your shoulders. You are in a village that doesn't have a name worth remembering. Every patch of earth has been walked on for centuries, but no one's thought to write any of it down. A single road, more mud than road, leads toward a church tower that leans like it's tired of pretending to be holy. This is England around the 13th century. Barley fields surround you like a sea of faded gold. Wheat is grown too, of course, but mostly by people who can afford to lose a harvest or two without starving, which is to say, not you. You step outside, and the wind is wet and familiar. Sheep bleat on a distant hill, indifferent to your ambitions. The ground squishes under your feet in that particular medieval way that says, your shoes are made of something technically called leather, but spiritually called regret. The barley stalks sway in the distance, short, stubborn, and rough around the edges. They're not as glamorous as wheat, which grows taller, straighter, and shinier, like the plant equivalent of a nobleman's son. But barley has grit. It survives in bad soil, laughs at cold weather, and grows even when you forget to be nice to it. A miller passes by, his cart creaking with sacks of grain. He nods politely, his face powdered with flour, his entire aura one of existential fatigue. He's been grinding barley all week for ale, and grinding his own vertebrae for longer. Wheat's for the priests, he mutters, as if to confirm the social order of bread. Historians still debate whether commoners truly preferred barley bread, or whether they just pretended to like it because they didn't have a choice. One theory suggests they even called it maslin, a mix of barley and rye or wheat, as if naming it something fancy could fool their stomachs. You walk past a small bakehouse. The baker's wife is pulling loaves from the oven, dense, smoky, and the color of wet bark. She sets them on a wooden board to cool, brushing away flour with the back of her hand. The smell is oddly comforting, even if the bread itself could double as a blunt weapon. She glances at you. Wheat's for feast days, she says with a smirk. Barley's for the rest of the year, and the rest of us. You nod. You don't argue with bakers. They hold too much quiet power. And so begins your quiet immersion into a world where barley wasn't the second choice. It was the sensible one. Wheat needed richer soil, gentler weather, and luck. Barley needed only patience, mud, and the kind of faith born from repetition. You probably won't make it through this day, but that's fine. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to drift. Before we go further, if you find yourself enjoying this sleepy stroll through mud and medieval grain hierarchy, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Keeps the mill turning and the bread warm. And, if you're awake enough, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is there. I like to imagine this story floating through different nights at once, like smoke from 1,000 hearths. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk toward the edge of the field, where a woman is threshing barley by hand, swinging a flail with rhythmic grace, the sound dull but steady. Chaff drifts around her like pale snow. Her face is lined but calm, and her motions are slow enough to make time seem irrelevant. A boy nearby watches her work. Why don't we eat wheat like the lords do? He asks. Because wheat doesn't like us, she says simply, not looking up. That's the truth of it. Wheat was fickle. A crop that wanted good soil, perfect rain, and flattering attention. Barley, by contrast, was forgiving. It grew in thin, chalky ground where wheat would sulk and die. It tolerated the salt breezes of coastal farms and the stubborn clay of inland ones. Even the monasteries, those early centers of medieval agriculture, preferred barley for brewing. Ale was safer to drink than most water, a tragic but useful discovery, and monks could hardly be expected to survive on plain piety alone. One 12th century record shows that some abbeys brewed 3 kinds of ale per day. Strong ale for guests, moderate for the brothers, and weak for the poor. Barley was in all of them. You take a sip from a mug left near the well. Slightly warm, flat, but strangely soothing. Somewhere, a rooster crows again, apparently confused about what time it is. And as the morning stretches lazily toward noon, you realize the story of barley isn't really about a plant. It's about survival with dignity, about making do with what grows easily when the world doesn't. A philosophy of sleep, in a way. By afternoon, the village starts to hum like a tired beehive. Someone's mending a fence, someone's yelling at a pig, and someone else is quietly regretting life choices while stirring a pot of something suspiciously gray. You pass the miller again. His cart now empty, his face more powdered than ever. He's humming a tune about rain that may or may not exist. The alehouse door creaks open just enough to release the scent of barley mash, roasted over low heat. You step inside. It's dim but warm. The light from the hearth dances across wooden beams carved with names of people who probably owed the landlord money. You sit at a bench. The alewife, a woman with arms like oaken branches and a face that's seen too many harvests, sets a mug before you without asking what you want. It's barley ale, of course. It always is. You look like someone who's thinking about wheat, she says. You smile faintly. Maybe. She snorts. Everyone thinks about wheat when they're tired. But barley doesn't judge. It just grows. It's a poetic sentiment, and you make a mental note to embroider it on a pillow someday. One historical fact: in much of medieval England, wheat was reserved for white bread, a luxury eaten by nobles and clergy, while the common folk relied on black bread made from barley, oats, or rye. Even markets in London had laws regulating how fine your flour could be, depending on your social class. It wasn't just about taste, it was about hierarchy baked into dough. Barley bread was denser, darker, and slightly bitter. But it was honest. You notice a young man at the other end of the alehouse showing off a handful of clean, golden wheat grains. From my uncle's manor, he boasts. Imported from the south. Grows straight and tall. The alewife glances over and mutters, "Straight and tall, yes. Just like his pride before the first frost kills it." She's not wrong. Medieval weather was temperamental. Cold spells could ruin wheat fields overnight, while barley usually pulled through. Barley's short growing season meant it dodged the worst of the cold. It was the survivalist's grain, the medieval equivalent of that one friend who always brings snacks to a road trip. Outside, the rain begins again. Softly at first, then like it's remembering something personal. You finish your ale and step back into the world, which has become all puddles and perfume of wet soil. Down the lane, the blacksmith's apprentice is feeding barley straw into the forge fire, an old trick to keep the coals burning evenly. The air smells like iron and malt. That's your obscure tidbit for the evening. Barley wasn't just food. It was fuel, bedding, roof thatch, and even medicine. Some folk healers brewed barley water for fevers, claiming it cooled the inner heat of the body. Others used it in poultices to soothe wounds. You pass by the churchyard, where the priest is delivering a sermon about humility. You can't help but think he's standing on the same kind of humility that barley fields represent: lowly, reliable, and ever-present. Wheat may have been noble, but barley was devout. Historians still debate whether the shift from barley to wheat dominance in later centuries reflected genuine agricultural progress or just social aspiration. Perhaps people didn't want better bread, they just wanted nicer bread than their neighbor. By evening, the village settles into the sound of rain on thatch, distant laughter, and the sigh of tired animals. You lie down on your straw mattress, which, yes, probably contains more barley husks than feathers. Your eyes close. The last thing you hear is the wind brushing against the field. A dry, whispering sound, like grain rubbing against grain, like time turning over in its sleep. And the barley keeps growing. Morning again or something like it. You wake not to a rooster this time, but to the soft shuffle of villagers walking toward the fields. There's a rhythm to their movement, a sleepy coordination, like the slow breathing of a whole community that knows what it's doing, and knows it'll have to do it again tomorrow. You pull on your coarse tunic, which has the comforting scent of smoke, sweat, and a faint dusting of flour that seems to have become part of your identity. Outside, the world smells of wet hay and rising mist. The barley fields shimmer faintly in the early light. The heads of grain are heavy and bowed, glistening with dew. It's not glamorous, no painter will immortalize this view, but it has a certain nobility, the quiet kind that doesn't need applause. The old reeve, the village's half-feared, half-ignored overseer, walks the edges of the field with a stick, inspecting for pests. His stick is more symbolic than effective, but he seems to think the barley listens to him better that way. You follow him at a distance. He pauses, squints at the horizon, and grumbles. Wheat looks fine until it remembers its English. You nod, though you suspect he says that about everything. He taps the ground with his stick. Barley doesn't mind the cold, doesn't mind the damp, doesn't mind me. It just grows. A thought you've heard before, maybe too often, but every time it feels like a spell. One historical fact: in medieval England, barley wasn't just common. It covered nearly half of all cultivated grain acreage by the 14th century. It was dependable, affordable, and crucial for brewing ale, which remained the default hydration strategy for centuries. Yes, most medieval people drank mild ale daily, including children, because it was safer than the local river water, which doubled as both laundry site and fish graveyard. You walk to the edge of the field where the barley meets a patch of wheat. Taller, straighter, prettier. It gleams in the sun like it knows it's destined for a feast table. A few village girls stand there, plucking stray heads for decoration. Don't mix them, one says. The reeve gets cross if wheat ends up in the ale. Barley is for brewing, wheat is for boasting. It's a social rule as much as an agricultural one. There's a light breeze now, and the barley hums softly. 1,000 tiny whispers brushing against each other. You could almost believe the land is singing. Somewhere behind you, the miller's cart rattles past again, and you can hear the faint clink of wooden cups, a reminder that every harvest here ends in a mug, not a loaf. You kneel down and run your hand through the barley stalks. They're coarse and dry, like hair left too long in the wind. You think of all the hands that have done the same motion for centuries, all the silent prayers for weather that wouldn't betray them. Historians still debate whether the preference for barley ale over wine or mead was cultural or simply practical. One monk, writing in the 12th century, noted that the English love their ale as the French love their bread. Too much to be rational about it. You smile faintly. Some things never change. In the distance, a woman is calling her children back from the fields. They're collecting fallen ears of barley in their aprons. Gleaning, it's called. The law says they're allowed to, though how much they take depends on how kind the reeve feels that day. It's all small economies here. Every grain, every gesture, measured and remembered. As the sun climbs higher, the field glows pale gold. You can almost forget how rough the bread is, how hard the winters can be, how small life feels. For now, it's just the quiet gold of barley and the steady comfort of work that keeps time moving. The reeve grunts beside you. Barley doesn't make heroes, he says, just survivors. And that, you think, might be the whole story. The monastery sits a few miles from the village, and you've always wanted to see it. Partly because the monks there are rumored to brew the strongest ale in the Shire, and partly because no one seems entirely sure what they do all day besides pray and ferment things. You take the dirt road winding between low hedges and patches of turnip fields. The air smells faintly of malt and incense. Two scents that probably shouldn't go together but somehow do. As you approach, you can hear the soft toll of a bell. Not the grand kind of cathedral bell that shakes the soul, but the small, metallic tonk of practicality. Like a reminder that even holiness runs on schedule. The monastery's walls are thick, the color of old honey. Inside the courtyard, a few brothers in brown habits move with slow purpose. One stirs a vat, another carries sacks of grain. Another seems to be having a quiet conversation with a goat. A round-faced monk greets you with a gentle smile. You've come for the ale, haven't you? You hesitate. Maybe the history. He chuckles. Same thing. Inside the brewhouse, the air is warm and heavy with the smell of fermenting barley. Huge wooden tubs bubble quietly, watched over like sleeping children. Steam curls lazily toward the ceiling. The monk gestures at one vat proudly. Barley's the Lord's grain. Patient. Humble. Easy to please. You nod, though you recall another monk from a different abbey once writing that barley is the grain of man's weakness, that which he turns to sin through drink. Perhaps it's both. Here's your historical fact. By the High Middle Ages, monasteries in England were some of the largest producers of barley ale. It was their daily drink, their hospitality gift to travelers, and occasionally their economic backbone. Records from St. Paul's Cathedral in the 13th century show that each monk received about a gallon of ale per day. And yet they still found time to copy manuscripts. An impressive multitasking feat. You sip a mug offered to you. Thick, yeasty, and surprisingly smooth. This is better than the village ale, you admit. The monk grins. We have better barley. He leads you out to the monastery fields, where rows of barley stretch neatly toward the horizon. We keep it simple, he says. Wheat demands too much, rye grows too wild. But barley forgives. That phrase again. Always forgiveness. It's the recurring theology of this landscape. As you walk, he points to a small plot fenced off near the wall. That's where we grow wheat for the Eucharist. Pure, white, symbolic. You peer at it, small, delicate, coddled by prayer. The irony doesn't escape you. The grain of the poor feeds the body, while the grain of the sacred feeds the soul. A faint smile touches the monk's lips, as if he's heard your thought. Barley keeps us alive, he says. Wheat reminds us why. He invites you to stay for supper, pottage, dark bread, and, predictably, ale. The meal is quiet, rhythmic. The sound of spoons and rain is almost meditative. Your obscure tidbit for tonight. Some monasteries brewed gruit ale, flavored not with hops, which came later, but with herbs like yarrow, mugwort, and wild rosemary. It gave the ale a faintly medicinal tang, or at least the illusion of one. Historians still debate whether these herbal alesh had mild hallucinogenic effects, or if monks simply enjoyed believing they did. After supper, the monks retire to prayer and you step outside. The air is cool and damp. The barley sways in moonlight, whispering softly to itself. The monk's words linger in your mind. Barley forgives. You look out across the quiet fields and think, maybe that's why barley lasted longer than empires. You wake to bells again. This time, the slow, deliberate kind that mean it's market day. The air feels heavier, as if the clouds themselves are bracing for gossip. You follow the dirt path down to the village square, where stalls are already being set up, baskets of eggs, bundles of leeks, a few nervous chickens that clearly didn't sign up for this. The baker's cart arrives last, covered with linen cloths that hide the loaves from the greedy eyes of early shoppers. When the cloths come off, the difference is immediate. Half the bread is pale gold and soft, the other half dark, thick, and cracked like old bark. The pale loaves are made from wheat flour, sifted fine and kneaded with care. They are manchet bread, white, rich, and light enough to be torn with fingers rather than hacked with a knife. They're destined for the Lord's manor, for feasts, for mouths that never taste dirt. The dark loaves, dense and heavy, are barley. They smell heartier, sharper. They'll sit in peasant cupboards for days, sliced thinly and soaked in broth to soften them enough for chewing. You stand near the baker as he haggles. A farmer offers 2 turnips and a promise for a barley loaf. The baker sighs and accepts. Business, after all, is survival dressed as generosity. One historical fact worth chewing on. In medieval England, bread color was a visible marker of class. The lighter the loaf, the higher your social standing. Brown bread wasn't rustic charm. It was poverty. Wheat was milled and sifted multiple times, losing its husk and fiber, while barley flour stayed rough and honest. A local woman eyes the white loaves wistfully. They say it's softer, she murmurs. The baker shrugs. So is sin. You almost laugh, but stop yourself when you realize he's serious. A little girl runs past, clutching a heel of barley bread like its treasure. She bites into it and chews slowly, her jaw working with the patience of someone who's learned not to complain about texture. The market noise grows. Chickens, gossip, the clink of coins that are mostly promises. The alewife you met earlier is there too, refilling jugs and laughing at her own jokes. She spots you. Still thinking about wheat? She calls. You grin. Sometimes. She leans closer. Don't. Wheat's for people who want to be remembered. Barley's for people who want to eat again tomorrow. The statement lands with the kind of quiet truth that sounds simple only because it's ancient. As the morning stretches, you wander toward the edge of the market where a friar preaches about charity. He points toward the loaves. Even barley was made by God, he declares dramatically. Someone mutters, so was rain, and that doesn't make it pleasant. A few chuckles ripple through the crowd. Even holiness can't sweeten the taste of necessity. Your obscure tidbit for today. In some English parishes, families made sole loaves of barley bread on All Souls' Day, baking them as offerings for the dead, 1 loaf per departed relative. The practice was both charity and superstition. Feed the poor, feed the afterlife. Historians still debate whether the custom truly honored the dead or just ensured that no bread went to waste. The sun dips low. The last loaves sell. The baker packs up, and the square empties into a hush of footsteps and distant dogs. You look at the crumbs on the ground, dark ones and pale ones, mingled together. By nightfall, they'll be eaten by birds who never cared which was wheat and which was barley. You think maybe that's wisdom, or maybe it's just nature being practical again. It's evening now, and the fields shimmer with dew again. The barley is almost ready for harvest, fat, golden heads swaying like slow applause. You're walking toward the alehouse, that low-roofed sanctuary of human resignation. Inside, the smell hits you first. Malt, wood smoke, a hint of spilled dreams. The same alewife greets you with a nod and a full mug before you can even sit. Barley's been good this year, she says. The wheat looks pretty, but it's all show. Shallow roots. You sip. The ale tastes slightly different tonight, fuller, smoother, as if the grain itself knew it was the hero of the story. She leans on the counter. Do you know why barley makes better ale? You shake your head. Because it doesn't need much to be happy. Just water, heat, And time. Wheat. Now that's a diva. You give it the same treatment. It sulks. You can't help smiling. It's exactly the kind of earthy theology you've come to expect here. One historical fact. By the late 13th century, England's ale production was so extensive that towns began regulating prices and quality through assizes of ale. Inspectors, often women, tested the strength and flavor of local brews to ensure fairness. These ale tasters held surprising authority and could publicly shame brewers who cheated customers with weak or watered ale. You imagine it. Women walking through muddy lanes, sipping mugs of barley ale in the name of civic duty. A noble cause, really. The alewife laughs when you tell her that. If that job comes back, I'll be first in line. Outside, the night wind howls through the cracks in the thatch. The door rattles softly, and you pull your cloak tighter. The air is cool but not cruel. A farmer at the next table lifts his mug. To the mud, he declares. Everyone raises theirs in agreement. To the mud. It's a toast to the earth itself, to the thing that stains their clothes, grows their food, and refuses to be clean. In a world that worships saints and kings, mud is the one honest equalizer. Your obscure tidbit for the night. Some medieval farmers mixed barley straw into their walls and floors for insulation. It absorbed damp and gave homes a faint, comforting smell of malt, like living inside a bakery. You sit quietly as the fire pops and sighs. Historians still debate whether the ale culture of England slowed down work productivity or simply made life bearable in a century without comfort. But watching these people talk, laugh, and occasionally snore over their mugs, you decide the debate doesn't matter. Barley ale isn't about indulgence. It's about endurance with flavor. Outside, rain begins again. It always does. The sound on the thatch is soft and patient, the same rhythm the barley knows. You finish your mug, set it down, and listen. The wind carries the faintest scent of fields, of grain that will become flour, that will become bread, that will become someone's meal or someone's prayer. Everything circles back, and somewhere in the dark, barley keeps growing. You wake to the feeling of mud trying to claim your shoes. The fields are slick from last night's rain, and every step sounds like the earth sighing. Today, you're walking with a group of farmers who are poking the ground with sticks. Not for fun, though it looks that way, but to judge how deep the damp goes. It's early autumn, and timing is everything now. Too soon, and the seed rots. Too late, and frost steals the season. You lean on your walking stick and squint at the horizon. The fields are patchwork. Some dark, rich, and generous, others pale and sulking. The darker soil is clay-heavy, perfect for barley. The lighter, sandier bits might suit wheat, but they dry too fast, and England's weather doesn't really believe in consistency. One historical fact buried here. In the Middle Ages, England's soil quality varied wildly across regions. Barley thrived on the heavier, wetter soils of the north and west, while wheat demanded lighter, drier, more temperamental land, the kind usually owned by wealthier lords. The farmers you're walking with know this instinctively, even if they've never read a book. They taste dirt like winemakers. A pinch between the teeth, a nod of the head, a muttered, "Too sour this year." The world of medieval farming is full of weather gossip. Everyone blames something, the rain, the moon, the saints, or occasionally, France. One farmer points at a patch of yellowing shoots. "That's bad temper soil," he says. "Never forgave us for plowing too early last year." You smile at the superstition, but secretly you like it. It feels truer than half the scientific explanations you've heard. Your obscure tidbit for the day. In some parts of medieval England, farmers fed their soil with fish heads. Literally. The practice was called muck and miring. They'd bury leftover fish from coastal trade routes into fields, swearing it made the grain thicker and sweeter. The smell must have been impressive. You kneel to touch the dirt. It's cool and slightly sticky, clinging to your skin like a reminder that everything you eat starts here, uncomfortably close to worms. A farmer's wife brings out ale for everyone, as she always does when spirits droop. It's barley ale, of course, and she hands you a cup with a smile. "Drink this," she says. "It'll make the land less moody." Historians still debate whether she meant that literally or just kindly. You drink anyway, and for a moment, the whole countryside seems to hum. Fields, people, birds, and sky, all locked in a quiet argument about who truly runs things. You've found yourself once again inside stone walls. A monastery this time. It smells of ink, smoke, and barley. The brothers here have perfected the art of brewing. You can hear it, the slow bubbling from the wooden vats, the hiss of malt steaming in copper pans, the faint murmur of prayer somewhere between recipe and ritual. A young monk named Brother Oswin shows you around. He walks fast for a man in sandals. "You must understand," he says. "Ale is a mercy. Water alone is dangerous." You nod. You've heard the stories, people falling ill from bad wells. Boiling and fermenting barley water killed off the worst of the unseen beasts, even if no one understood why. One historical fact that bubbles up here. By the 12th century, monasteries were England's largest producers of ale. Some brewed thousands of gallons a year, not just for the monks but for travelers, workers, and charity. Their barley fields were tended with almost the same devotion as their prayers. Brother Oswin opens a small wooden chest. Inside, parchment recipes line up like little scrolls of alchemy. "We measure time by boils," he explains, "and grace by fermentation." You watch him stir a pot of malt, the smell sweet and earthy. It's oddly comforting, like toasted bread dreaming of becoming something more ambitious. He laughs suddenly. Once, Brother Edmund tried to brew with wheat instead of barley. Thought it would make a finer drink. It exploded. You blink. Exploded. He nods solemnly. Foamed straight out of the cask and into the abbot's sandals. A holy mess. You both laugh quietly, careful not to wake the scriptorium where silence is law. Your obscure tidbit. In some monasteries, each monk had a personal ale allowance, up to a gallon a day. It wasn't indulgence. It was hydration, calories, and courage in liquid form. The brewhouse here is a warm place, a small rebellion against the chill of stone cloisters. Outside, you can hear rain again, or maybe it's just the steady dripping of condensation. Either way, it matches the rhythm of Oswin's stirring. "Barley," he says, almost to himself, "is the Lord's proof that patience ferments into something worthwhile." Historians still debate whether the monks truly understood fermentation chemistry, or if they just had divine luck. Either way, their recipes lasted centuries. You take a sip from the ladle he offers. It's rich, malty, and slightly sweet, the taste of centuries condensed into warmth. Brother Oswin smiles faintly. "We call this liquid comfort. You may call it history." The candles flicker, throwing barley-colored light across the walls. You feel sleep tugging at you again, slow and inevitable. Outside, the wind hums through the monastery eaves. An old, soft tune that sounds a lot like barley growing. And for once, in the cold and the dark, everything feels exactly as it should. You wake to the sound of laughter and clinking cups, not the echoing kind from monasteries, but the warm, muddy, slightly chaotic hum of village life. You've wandered into a small English town, somewhere between a market and a puddle, and the center of it all is an alehouse. The sign above the door is nothing more than a bunch of barley stalks tied together, the medieval equivalent of a glowing neon open. Inside, it's smoky, cozy, and slightly sticky. A woman with powerful arms and a permanent smirk is stirring a vat the size of a baby's room. Her sleeves are rolled up, and her apron could tell the story of the last 10 brews. "Name's Margaret," she says, "but the village calls me Peg the alewife." You nod respectfully. Alewives, women brewers, were the lifeblood of medieval towns. Most households brewed, but the best brewers turned it into a trade. Some made fortunes. Others made gossip. Your historical fact for this evening. By the 14th century, women dominated the brewing trade in England. They sold ale directly from their homes or stalls, often marked by a green bush or broomstick hung above the door, a sign that fresh ale's ready. Peg ladles you a mug of thick, cloudy ale. "Barley," she says, "never lies. Wheat's for priests. Barley's for people who actually work." You sip. The surprisingly good, a little sour, a little sweet, the kind of drink that feels like it's trying to apologize for the weather. Behind you, a few men are playing some incomprehensible dice game. A child chases a chicken through the doorway. Peg doesn't blink. "That's dinner or a customer's pet," she mutters. "Either way, it'll come back." You look around and notice a wooden pole stuck in the ground near the counter, covered in tiny notches. Peg catches your glance. "That's my trust stick," she explains. "Each notch is a debt. If they don't pay, the stick grows." Your obscure tidbit. In medieval alehouses, debt records were often kept on tally sticks, split pieces of wood with matching notches, one half for the seller, one for the buyer. It was an early credit system centuries before paperwork ruined everything. A drunk man to your left starts singing a song about the barley fields, or maybe about losing his shoes. It's hard to tell. Peg rolls her eyes. "Barley's the real poet here," she says. "It makes men think they can sing." Historians still debate whether alehouses like Peg's were more about drinking or community, but sitting here you realize the two were inseparable. You hear the creak of floorboards, the hiss of ale bubbling, the murmur of voices finding their rhythm in the night. The world, for all its mud and mess, feels oddly well-balanced. "Drink slow," Peg says softly. "It's not the ale that gets you, it's the hurry." You take her advice. You wake to bells, not church bells, but the sharper, more irritating clang of an official cart rolling through the village square. It's tax day. A man in a fur-trimmed cloak and muddy boots steps down, unrolling a scroll like it's a weapon. "By order of His Majesty's Treasury," he begins, and instantly, everyone in earshot pretends to be deeply fascinated by clouds. The problem, as you soon learn, is that barley's been too successful. Everyone brews it, everyone sells it, and the crown wants a piece. Your historical fact. During the reign of Edward III, 14th century, ale and barley were heavily taxed to fund the king's wars with France. Officials called ale tasters inspected and licensed brewers, testing their product and reporting profits. A failed inspection could ruin you. You watch as the official sniffs a mug of Peg's ale. He grimaces, not because it's bad, but because it's better than he expected. "Too strong," he says flatly. "Taxed double." Peg's smirk twitches. "Then maybe I'll water it down," she says. "And you can drink it like a nun." The crowd tries not to laugh. You fail completely. Barley, it turns out, was both blessing and bait. It made good ale, but it also made easy money for kings and enemies for taxmen. Your obscure tidbit. To resist these taxes, some brewers developed secret malt barns, hidden behind haystacks or under floorboards, where they dried barley illegally. If caught, fines could reach a full year's income. But most people kept brewing anyway because stopping meant going thirsty. You walk through the market later and see the ripple effect. Fewer mugs on tables, fewer songs in the air, and the faint smell of barley growing sullen in sacks. Historians still debate whether these taxes actually hurt the common folk more than they helped the war effort, but you suspect the answer lies in Peg's now empty porch. That night, the moon hangs low, and the village feels quieter, heavier. You wander past the fields, where the barley glimmers faintly in the dark, as though whispering, "We'll outlast your kings." And you believe it. Barley's patient. It doesn't care who's on the throne, only who has the weather on their side. You sit by the road with your back against a sack of grain, the stars above flickering like distant candles. The wind smells faintly of malt and rain. Sleep now. Peg's voice echoes in your head. The barley's still growing, and somewhere in the quiet English night you do. You wake to the scent of baking bread. Not the golden, photogenic kind, but something denser, darker, and suspiciously lumpy. A baker pulls open the wooden hatch of his clay oven, the kind built right into the village wall. Steam and smoke drift out like ghosts escaping a promise. "Morning," he says, handing you a round loaf that looks like it's been through a minor siege. "Barley bread today. It's humble, but it won't kill you." You nod. In medieval England, that was actually high praise. Your historical fact. By the 13th century, most peasants ate barley or rye bread. Wheat was too expensive, reserved for nobility, monasteries, and the occasional festival miracle. Wheat bread was called manchet, fine, white, and utterly unattainable. Barley bread, meanwhile, was coarse, dark, and mildly depressing in winter light. You bite into your loaf. It's dense, nutty, and slightly sweet, like someone accidentally invented granola before realizing sugar hadn't been discovered yet. The baker shrugs. Wheat's fine for those who've never met mud. But barley grows anywhere. It doesn't mind the cold or the damp, or the way the Lord Steward looks at you when you pay rent late. You chew thoughtfully. He's right. Wheat demanded pampering. Clean soil, careful rotation, sunshine that never lasted long enough. Barley, on the other hand, was the realist's grain. It survived on less. It made do. Your obscure tidbit. Some rural Englishers added ground peas, beans, or even tree bark to stretch their barley dough. It wasn't about taste. It was about not starving before the next harvest. Archaeologists have found traces of these filler flours baked into old hearthstones, proving that even bad bread has a story. Coarse, the baker adds, slapping flour off his hands. Barley bread's a bit honest. It tells you how poor you are in every bite. He smiles, faintly self-deprecating. Wheat lies. Barley doesn't. A woman nearby is bartering with a single egg for half a loaf. A child stares at the bread as if it's treasure. The baker breaks the loaf in two and gives him the bigger half. Barley's generous that way, he says. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants were truly malnourished or simply well-adjusted to scarcity. But looking around the smoky street, you can see that survival wasn't always tragic. It was simply life. You take your loaf to the edge of the green, where chickens and gossip mingle freely. The barley fields roll out beyond, stretching toward the horizon, whispering like tired prophets in the breeze. You think of Peg the alewife and realize, the barley you drink and the barley you eat might not be glamorous, but they bind everyone together. Monks, farmers, bakers, even kings who pretend not to like it. You take another bite, chew slowly, and think, maybe this is what keeps the country running. Not courage, not faith, just stubborn brown bread. You walk along a narrow dirt road, the kind that seems to have been invented by accident, half path, half puddle. Ahead of you creaks a cart stacked high with sacks of grain. The smell of barley dust fills the air, warm, earthy, almost sweet if you ignore how much of it is in your nose. The carter, a young man with shoulders built from complaining, wipes his brow. Taking it to market, he says, if the wheel holds and the weather don't drown me. You fall into step beside him. The cart's wooden wheels leave deep ruts in the mud, as though history itself is too heavy to move quickly. Your historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, barley became one of England's main export grains, especially through ports like Lynn and Bristol. Much of it was shipped to Flanders and Holland, where English ale was considered superior, a rare national compliment at the time. Merchants grew rich trading something peasants saw as ordinary. But that's how history works. Ordinary things, moved in great quantity, quietly change the world. The carter laughs. They drink our barley beer over there and call it fancy. If only they saw where it came from. You both pass a small roadside inn. A painted sign shows two barley stalks crossed over a crown, England's unofficial emblem of half-hearted glory. Inside, you hear someone reciting trade prices as if they were gospel verses. Your obscure tidbit. Some merchants used barley as currency in border trade, measured not by coins, but by bushels and quarters. A man's fortune could literally be counted in barrels. The word quarter itself came from grain measurement before it ever meant a fraction of mercy. As evening falls, the road widens into a small market town. You see scales, sacks, and shouting. A symphony of barley moving from field to coin, coin to bread, bread to strength. But in the chaos, something else catches your eye. A priest quietly buying a cartload of the coarsest barley flour. For the poor, he murmurs, as if embarrassed. You smile. Even the church, with all its indulgent rituals, knows that grace sometimes comes in a sack of grain. Historians still debate whether England's barley trade truly lifted rural life or simply fed foreign thirst. But it's clear the grain had legs. It traveled more widely than most people who grew it. That night, you rest by the side of the road, your back against a sack of barley that smells faintly of sun and sweat. The wind rustles through the grass, whispering in that same gentle tone you've heard since the beginning. Steady, patient, enduring. Somewhere nearby, someone hums an ale song. Someone else curses at a stuck wheel. And above it all, you hear the barley, quiet, breathing, waiting for dawn. Keep growing, you whisper. The world's not done with you yet. And in the soft hum of crickets, the barley agrees. You wake to the tolling of a bell, deep, resonant, and vaguely disappointed in you. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crowed at the wrong hour, and the sky is doing that undecided thing between mist and drizzle. You're standing outside a Benedictine abbey, the kind built half for prayer and half for weather survival. Stone walls streaked with moss. Small windows like the eyes of someone unimpressed by sin or sunlight. A monk passes by, hood up, sandals squelching in the mud. You're early, he mutters, as if you've ruined the drama of the dawn. You follow him inside, through cold corridors that smell of wax, damp, and, surprisingly, malted barley. In the cloister's corner, two monks stand over a row of wooden tubs, steam rising like medieval incense. They're brewing. Apparently, prayer isn't the only thing that keeps monasteries running. Your historical fact. By the 12th century, English monasteries were among the largest beer producers in Europe. They brewed for monks, pilgrims, and visitors, often several grades of ale. Prima, secunda, and tertia, strong, medium, and weak. A monk stirs the bubbling mash with solemn intensity, as if translating psalms directly into liquid form. He looks up at you and says, "It's barley, of course. Wheat's too holy for mortals." Another monk chuckles softly. And barley doesn't complain when the angels don't drink their share. You stand in the heat of the brewery, watching grain and water become history. Barley was perfect for monks. It was plentiful, forgiving, and entirely unpretentious. You didn't have to pray for it to grow, though many did anyway. Your obscure tidbit. Monks in northern England often added bog myrtle and wild rosemary to flavor their barley ale, centuries before hops became standard. Some believed these herbs helped calm excessive thoughts, which, in monk terms, meant daydreaming about lunch. One monk, older, with barley dust in his beard, beckons you over. "Watch this," he says. He pours a small measure of ale into a wooden bowl and waits. When the foam settles evenly, he nods with satisfaction. "A balanced soul," he says quietly. "If it foams too much, it's pride. If it dies too quick, it's despair." You can't tell if he's joking, but you hope he isn't. Historians still debate how much ale monks really drank. Some say up to a gallon a day. But standing here, surrounded by warmth and calm industry, you realize it wasn't about indulgence. It was about rhythm. A barley brew for every hour between prayer and sleep. The bells ring again. A line of monks files into the refectory. You follow, bowl in hand. The ale tastes smooth and quiet, like a thought you can't quite lose. Somewhere, a scribe is copying a psalm. Somewhere else, barley is cooling in a vat. You breathe in the calm and think. The divine may not live in the barley, but it certainly visits often. The next morning, you find yourself at the abbey gate again, blinking into pale light. A cart approaches, piled high with sacks of something green and papery. You assume it's herbs until you catch the smell, sharp, bitter, strangely modern. A lay brother jumps down and opens a sack. "Hops," he says proudly. The brewers wrinkle their noses. "Foreign nonsense." Your historical fact. In the late 15th century, hops began to appear in English brewing, imported from Flanders and Germany. They preserved beer longer but changed its flavor, bitter, more stable, less friendly. Traditional ale brewers, especially women and monks, despised it. To them, barley ale without hops was natural, honest, and alive. A young monk sniffs the hops suspiciously. "Tastes like penance," he mutters. Another crosses himself. "The devil's weed," he says. "Only foreigners would dry bitterness and sell it as virtue." You can't help but smile. Every generation, it seems, finds its heresy in flavor. Your obscure tidbit. In 1519, the city of Norwich banned hopped beer, declaring it unfit to drink. The ban lasted about as long as a medieval roof in storm season. By mid-century, hops were everywhere, too useful to hate forever. The monks gather in debate. Barley was given by God. One insists. We should trust it as it is. Another, more practical, shrugs. If it keeps longer, perhaps it's divine preservation. You stand quietly by the wall, watching the tension between faith and fermentation. Historians still debate whether this shift from ale to beer marked progress or loss, whether England's cozy, local brewing culture gave way to a colder, commercial one. But you notice something simple. Barley doesn't mind either way. It grows the same. It listens to rain, not argument. It waits for hands, not opinions. That evening, the monks try a new batch brewed with hops. They sip cautiously. Silence. Then one of them grins faintly. "Tastes durable. Like it'll outlive us," another says. They all nod, resigned and curious, as monks tend to be when facing the inevitable. You wander outside, where the barley fields sway just beyond the abbey walls. The wind carries both scents, warm malt and sharp hops, two eras overlapping in the twilight. A bat flutters past. A bell rings for Compline. You think, not for the first time, that history always smells faintly of barley. And as the last light fades, you imagine the monks still inside, sipping and debating softly into the night, each convinced that their brew is the one that pleases both God and the stomach. You smile to yourself. Barley, as always, keeps its opinions to itself. You wake to the clatter of pots and the hiss of something too hot for comfort. The air is thick with smoke, onions, and a kind of medieval determination, the scent of ambition, slightly burned. You've stumbled into a manor kitchen, where barley isn't just food, it's survival disguised as cuisine. A cook with shoulders like boulders is shouting at a boy to fetch more firewood. And mind the ashes this time. We're not seasoning the porridge. You step aside as a line of servants marches past, balancing trays, bowls, and one entire pig that looks both proud and alarmed. At the far end of the room, you see a woman stirring a massive cauldron. Not soup, not stew, but a thick, pale mass of barley porridge. She catches your look and smirks. Breakfast for the Lord. And the dogs. Sometimes I forget which is which. Your historical fact. In medieval England, barley porridge, or pottage, was the staple meal for nearly everyone outside the nobility. It could be thick or thin, plain or spiced, with vegetables, scraps, or the occasional lucky shred of meat. Barley gave it body and kept people full through long days of fieldwork or feasting. The cook slaps a wooden spoon against the cauldron's rim. Barley's like the manor itself, she says. Feeds everyone, impresses no one. You taste a spoonful earthy, nutty, comforting. Not glamorous, but loyal. A servant beside you sighs. Every meal begins with barley, ends with barley, and dreams about barley. You grin. That sounds almost poetic. He frowns. It's indigestion. Your obscure tidbit. In some manors, cooks used barley flour to polish pewter plates and clean copper pots. It was absorbent, abrasive, and available, the medieval equivalent of baking soda. As the day stretches on, the kitchen becomes its own kingdom. Bread rising, stew simmering, dogs hovering hopefully. You notice one small sack in the corner labeled, "Fine barley meal." For guests. Even in luxury, barley never quite leaves the room. Historians still debate whether barley's dominance reflected poverty or practicality, whether it was the grain of the poor or the clever. But watching this kitchen, you suspect it was both. Barley didn't demand. It endured. And endurance in this world was a kind of wealth. The cook wipes her brow and says, "Wheat makes nobles proud. Barley keeps them alive." She's not wrong. The manor bell rings, echoing through the hall. Somewhere above, nobles lift silver spoons while below, servants lift wooden ones. The same meal, different bowls. You take another spoonful of porridge, warm and heavy, and it feels, strangely, fair. You wake again, this time to laughter and the low hum of a gathering crowd. Outside, the village green glows with lanterns and firelight. It's harvest time, and someone's hung a sign over the alehouse door, "Barley Moon Feast." You can smell roasted grains, baked bread, and smoke curling into the dusk. A fiddler tunes his instrument badly but enthusiastically. Children chase each other with stalks of dried barley, which they're using as makeshift swords. An old man with a beard like forgotten straw nudges you. It's the moon for barley, see? When it shines full, we dance, drink, and pray the next one's kind. Your historical fact. The term barley moon or harvest moon comes from the full moon nearest the autumn equinox. The light farmers used to work late into the night gathering crops. It marked both the end of hard labor and the beginning of communal celebration. A table in the square overflows with food, barley bread, barley pudding, and even a mysterious barley cake that looks suspiciously like an excuse for more ale. The alewives pour with pride. Peg is here too, somehow older, rounder, and twice as loud. Still brewing? You ask. She winks. Still surviving. Someone starts a song. Slow, rhythmic, half prayer, half pub chant. The lyrics are mostly nonsense about fields and moonlight, but everyone sings like it means everything. Your obscure tidbit. Some English villages held barley feasts, where the first sheaf of barley harvested was paraded around, decorated with ribbons, and named the Barley Bride. It was later ground into flour for communal bread, symbolizing fertility, luck, and mild intoxication. You watch as a young girl carries a bundle of barley tied with twine. She places it by the fire, bows slightly, and runs off laughing. No one explains the ritual. No one needs to. The moon climbs higher, pale gold against a black sky. You notice how everyone moves a little slower, speaks a little softer, as if the air itself has thickened with barley dust and memory. Historians still debate whether these feasts were pagan remnants or just practical excuses for rest. But here, now, it feels sacred. Not because of gods, but because of gratitude. You sit by the fire, a mug of ale in hand, and feel the world loosen its grip. Around you, laughter rises and falls like waves against the shore. The barley fields in the distance shimmer faintly in moonlight, the same gold that once swayed in Peg's yard, in the monk's cloister, in every field you've passed. Someone hands you a small piece of barley cake. You bite in, taste sweetness and smoke, and realize this. This quiet joy is why barley outlasted kings, plagues, and taxes. The fiddler misses a note. Someone cheers anyway. You laugh softly, because here, under the barley moon, history feels almost human. And you think, as the fire burns low, you probably won't make it through this night awake. You wake to the rhythmic jangle of metal or what you assume is metal, but when you open your eyes you realize it's grain. Bags and sacks and baskets of barley being poured, weighed, and argued over. A man in a felt hat is counting in handfuls instead of coins. 2 measures for rent, 1 for tithe, and don't forget the Lord's share. He mutters, his voice like gravel in a millstone. You're standing in a small wooden shed that smells of dust, mildew, and quiet panic. It's tax day in medieval England. The tax collector looks tired of existing, and the peasants look tired of pretending to care. Your historical fact. For centuries, barley was often used as payment for rent, fines, and feudal dues. Not because it was glamorous, but because it was consistent. Where coins were rare and wages rarest of all, grain spoke the language of necessity. A few bushels could pay for land, for livestock, even for leniency. A farmer shuffles forward, hat in hand. It was a dry year, he says softly. Half the yield turned bad. The collector nods with the sort of sympathy only paperwork can produce. Then half the rent, I suppose. The man blinks. Half forgiven? The collector looks horrified. Half owed. Barley trickles from one sack to another, a golden measure of power. You can almost hear it whisper. This is what your life is worth. Your obscure tidbit. The word barleycorn wasn't just poetic. It was literal. In early English measurement, 3 barleycorns laid end to end equaled 1 inch. Yes, the same grain that fed your porridge defined the very bones of English measurement. Which means, in a strange way, your shoe size is medieval agriculture in disguise. Outside, a child plays with spilled barley, pretending it's treasure. You want to tell them they're not wrong. Barley was currency, comfort, and curse, everything that made the system spin. Historians still debate whether this system kept people alive or simply kept them obedient. But looking around, you sense the truth lies somewhere in the dust. Barley was the middleman between hunger and hope. As the collector seals his ledger, he sighs. Next village, he mutters. Next promise. The peasants go home lighter than they arrived, in every sense. You trail after one of them down a rutted lane. His sack is half empty, but his hands are steady. Better barley than nothing, he says. At least it grows back. And there it is, the quiet resilience of the English peasant. Broke, barefoot, but still betting on barley. You follow the man into the village alehouse, and suddenly everything makes sense. The smell of roasted grain and spilled dreams. The soft thrum of talk, laughter, and the occasional snore. If Parliament had benches made of oak and mugs instead of scrolls, it might look exactly like this. The sign outside reads simply, "The Malted Crown." Inside, the air is thick with barley boiled, brewed, and blessed. Peg is here again, of course, eternal like yeast. She's wiping down the counter with a cloth that has seen better centuries. When she sees you, she grins. "Back again, traveler? Still talking about barley, I bet." You nod. "It's following me." She laughs. "That's how it starts." Your historical fact. Alehouses were the true community centers of medieval England. Barley ale wasn't just a drink. It was hydration, calories, and courage in a cup. Even the poorest drank it daily, partly because water was often unsafe, and partly because ale was safer and more cheerful. A man at the corner table slams his mug down. Barley feeds us, taxes us, and now drowns us. Long live the crop. Everyone cheers like it's a royal decree. You sip your ale. It's warm, flat, and oddly reassuring. Like a friend who never surprises you but always shows up. Peg leans in, whispering conspiratorially. "Do you know," she says, "we once had a priest who said too much ale made people lazy, so we brewed twice as much out of spite." Your obscure tidbit. In some English villages, ale tasters were official positions, elected annually to make sure no brewer watered down their barley ale. It was one of the few public offices where being drunk on duty was both acceptable and expected. As night falls, the alehouse fills with music and murmurs. You hear confessions, arguments about crops, and one passionate speech about geese that no one fully understands. The walls hum with a kind of democracy, messy, human, unrecorded. Historians still debate whether alehouses spread rebellion or simply softened it. But as you watch the laughter rise, it feels clear. These were England's truest parliaments. Smoky, loud, and barley-fed. Peg raises a mug. "To barley. May it never go to our heads or our taxes." Everyone drinks to that. You glance at the fire, thinking how many decisions in history were made with barley on the table and a bit too much in the blood. You imagine kings and peasants alike. All of them drunk on the same grain, all of them pretending to be different. And you smile, because that's the secret charm of barley. It made everyone equal, at least until morning. The fire crackles. Someone begins a lullaby disguised as a drinking song. You lean back in your chair, eyes half closed, as Peg hums softly behind the bar. Outside, the fields sleep. Inside, the alehouse dreams. You wake up to the smell of something baking, thick, sweet, and faintly smoky. It's early morning in a small village kitchen, and you're surrounded by bowls, flour, and laughter. A woman named Matilda is elbow-deep in dough, and she's humming a tune that's older than most kings. You're not entirely sure how you got here, but the warmth of the oven feels like an invitation to stay. Matilda looks at you, smiling. "You're just in time to learn the law of bread," she says. You blink. "There's a law for that?" "Oh yes," she replies. "Two, in fact, the lords and the bakers." You're about to witness one of medieval England's most quietly revolutionary moments. The link between barley, bread, and bureaucracy. Your historical fact. In 1266, England passed the Assize of Bread and Ale, one of the earliest examples of consumer protection law. It regulated the price, weight, and quality of bread and ale, ensuring that bakers and brewers didn't cheat their customers. It was all based on the price of wheat, but most of the population was still eating barley bread, rough and dark as winter mud. Matilda takes a small loaf from the oven. It looks humble, uneven, and slightly burnt. "This here's barley bread," she says, handing you a piece. It fills the belly but reminds you where you stand. You chew. It's dense, almost nutty, with a faint bitterness that somehow tastes honest. Wheat's for the gentry, she continues. But barley keeps the rest of us moving. You notice a child watching the loaves rise like a miracle. He asks, "Why don't we make white bread?" Matilda smirks. "Because we can't afford to love. But we can still laugh about it." Your obscure tidbit. Some parishes blessed bread made from mixed grains, a blend of wheat, rye, and barley, to give to the poor during festivals. It was called maslin bread, a word that sounds like a saint but tastes like survival. Outside, the church bell tolls, not for mass, but for market. Matilda wipes her hands and nods toward the door. "Come on, then. The law doesn't read itself." You follow her to the square, where a crier is shouting out prices from a parchment. "By order of the King's Assize, ale shall be sold at 2 pence the gallon, bread at the lawful weight of the wheat." The crowd murmurs. A man in the back mutters, "They always say wheat, never barley." You realize this is how class is baked into the crust. Legally, literally. Historians still debate whether the assize protected the poor or protected the market. But standing there, surrounded by villagers clutching coins and loaves, you sense it did both and neither. It was law as comfort food, equality in theory, and hierarchy in practice. Matilda sighs. "At least barley doesn't lie," she says. You nod, finishing your rough little loaf. It's not much, but it's real, which is more than you can say for most laws. You walk from the market toward the horizon, and suddenly there it is, a cathedral, rising like a ship of stone above a sea of barley fields. The spire catches the morning sun like a blade, but its shadow stretches across furrows and farms, the quiet empire that made it possible. You step closer. The ground smells of damp soil and roasted malt. Every block of the cathedral feels like it was paid for in grain. Because, in a way, it was. Your historical fact. Throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, barley tithes, payments in grain given to the church, helped finance the construction of many great English cathedrals. Farmers owed 1/10 of their yield to God, or at least to God's earthly administrators. And while gold built the altars, barley fed the builders. Inside, a monk is taking inventory. He's counting sacks instead of souls. 70 bushels this year, he mutters, his quill scratching across parchment. The Lord be thanked. And the weather. You wander down the nave. The air smells faintly of incense and malt, a mix of holiness and hunger. Stained glass glows in the morning light, showing saints who look suspiciously well-fed. You imagine the farmers outside, bent over their plows, muttering prayers that sound a lot like curses. Your obscure tidbit. Some cathedrals brewed their own monastic ale using tithes of barley, calling it liquid bread for the soul. Visitors could buy a mug after Mass, effectively turning piety into product placement. A young novice leads you to a side chapel. "This one's for the harvest," he says. You kneel on the cold stone and realize the floor beneath you, the literal foundation, was laid by hands that once sowed barley. Faith, you think, is often just labor with better lighting. Outside, the wind rustles through the barley fields. You picture the farmers who never set foot inside the cathedral they paid for, the builders who never saw it finished, the priests who never understood the crop that sustained their prayers. Historians still debate whether cathedrals were monuments to devotion or displays of dominance. But as you stand in the doorway, watching the fields shimmer like gold in the sun, the answer feels unimportant. Barley built both heaven and earth. One loaf, one brick, one quiet tithe at a time. You take a last look at the towering spire, knowing it points upward but depends entirely on what grows below. And as you turn back toward the fields, You feel the world tilt softly toward the ordinary, where holiness is grown, not declared. The wind hums through the barley like a hymn. You can almost hear the rhythm of centuries in it. A slow, breathing cycle of faith and food, toil and tenderness. Somewhere, a church bell rings again. But this time it sounds less like command and more like gratitude. You walk through the barley at dawn, and it moves like a sea, long golden waves breaking against your knees. The world is still wet with dew. The air smells faintly of iron and sweetness, and somewhere in the distance, a skylark tests its morning song. You think you're alone until you hear someone whisper. At first, you assume it's the wind. But no, it's more deliberate, more careful. A voice, soft and low, muttering phrases you can't quite catch. You push through the barley until you find her. An old woman with a shawl the color of frost, standing perfectly still among the stalks. She's whispering to the plants. When she sees you, she doesn't flinch. "Shoo," she says. "You'll startle it." You pause. "Startle what?" "The grain," she replies. "It listens." You try to laugh, but something about the way she says it makes you stop. Your historical fact. In medieval England, it was common belief that crops could hear. Farmers were careful about what they said while sowing or reaping, fearing that curses or careless words might offend the spirits of the field. Silence, reverence, and soft singing were thought to help the grain grow straight and full. The woman continues whispering as she walks through the rows, touching each stalk as if greeting old friends. "They know when we're angry," she says. "They know when we're tired. But they forgive us if we feed them our breath." You nod, mostly to be polite, though part of you wonders if this superstition was just another form of mindfulness in disguise. Your obscure tidbit. In some English regions, farmers performed a ritual called the barley charm. Before harvest, they would leave a handful of grain uncut in the corner of the field, called the beard of the barley. It was believed to house the spirit of the crop and ensure next year's fertility. The woman points toward a small tuft of untouched barley at the far edge. "There," she says. "We never take it all. You leave something behind, or the earth forgets who you are." The sun rises higher, glinting off each stalk like 1,000 tiny blades. You realize that this ritual, strange as it seems, is a kind of humility, a reminder that humans never truly own what they grow. Historians still debate whether these customs were remnants of pagan religion or simply practical gratitude disguised as magic. But as you listen to the barley rustling softly around you, it feels like something deeper, a language that survived by never being written down. The old woman smiles faintly. "You talk to it," she says, "and one day it talks back. Not in words, in weather." And as she walks away, the first breeze of the morning follows her, gentle, circular, like an old promise being kept. Later that day, clouds roll in thick, low, and gray as wool. The air feels electric, heavy with that peculiar silence that always precedes rain. You're back in the village, and everyone seems to be staring at the same thing. The sky. An old man spits into the dust and says, "The barley's got a cough again." You blink. "Excuse me?" He nods solemnly. "A sickness in the stalk. The monks say it's the devil. I say it's the rain." He's talking about crop blight, though he doesn't know the word for it. In medieval England, barley diseases, molds, rusts, and smuts, were seen as divine punishment or bad omens. Entire villages could lose their harvest overnight, their grain turning black and brittle, the year's labor undone by something too small to see. Your historical fact. Records from the 13th century describe multiple barley famines caused by wet summers. When the grain sprouted early or rotted in storage, people turned to peas, rye, or even boiled nettles for sustenance. It wasn't just hunger, it was humiliation. The man kicks a clod of soil, muttering, "If only the saints liked barley as much as we do." Someone nearby adds, "Aye, they prefer wheat for the miracles." A ripple of laughter spreads, thin but defiant. Your obscure tidbit. During outbreaks of crop disease, some farmers tried to heal their fields by dragging a plow in the shape of a cross across the furrows at midnight, praying as they walked. If that failed, they'd sprinkle the earth with ale, believing the blessed barley brew might coax the soil's spirit back to health. You follow a small group to a nearby field, where the barley looks sullen and sickly, tips blackened, stalks drooping. A woman kneels and whispers, "Don't worry, we'll brew you back." You realize she's pouring ale onto the roots. It's almost funny, trying to save a dying crop by giving it what it might have become. But somehow it doesn't feel foolish. It feels like a desperate kind of poetry. Historians still debate whether these rituals were superstition or simply attempts at control in a world ruled by chaos. Either way, the people kept trying. They didn't understand microbes, but they understood patterns, the way a field could mirror a mood, the way one year's grief could be carried in the grain of the next. The rain finally starts, soft at first, then steady. You stand there, drenched, watching the sick barley bow under the weight of water. And you think, if this crop were human, it would be England itself. Tired, resilient, slightly moldy, but unwilling to stop growing. A boy runs past, laughing in the downpour, clutching a single healthy stalk like a trophy. "Look," he shouts, "this one's fine." And everyone cheers, not because they believe it'll save the harvest, but because it's good to cheer for something. The old man nods at you. "See," he says, "barley coughs, but it don't die easy." You smile, half-soaked, half-awed, as thunder rolls across the hills. The storm sounds less like punishment and more like applause. You wake in the middle of the night to a sound you can't quite name. It isn't the wind. It isn't mice. The soft footsteps. Inside the granary. You rise quietly, the floorboards creaking in complaint. The moonlight cuts a pale path across sacks of grain stacked like sleeping giants. And there, just by the door, a figure. Small, still, almost translucent in the dust light. You freeze. It's a girl, or what's left of one. Her dress made of shadows, her hair a spill of cobweb. She's humming. A lullaby that sounds like a harvest song slowed down by grief. Then she looks at you, eyes gray as ash. "Don't take it all," she whispers. You blink. "Take what?" "The barley," she says. "Leave some for the cold ones." And just like that, she's gone. The air feels suddenly colder, as though the room itself remembered something. You're not imagining it. Or at least, you're not the first to. You're historical fact. In parts of medieval England, it was widely believed that the spirits of those who starved during bad harvests haunted the granaries. To appease them, villagers sometimes left a bowl of barley porridge overnight, called the meal for the forgotten. You crouch beside a half-empty sack, running your fingers through the grain. It's warm from the day's sun, soft as sand. Somewhere outside, a dog barks at nothing, or maybe something you can't see. Your obscure tidbit. In Norfolk, there was a folk tale of old Barley Ben, a ghost said to appear at threshing time, warning careless farmers not to overwork their hands or hoard their yield. If they ignored him, the story went, their next crop would sprout black. The curse of Ben's breath. You can't help but smile at that. Even ghosts, it seems, respected agricultural ethics. Still, you can feel it, that quiet reverence people once had for their stores. Grain wasn't just food. It was memory, luck, life itself condensed into golden dust. And where life gathers, so do ghosts. Historians still debate whether these legends were meant to frighten hoarders or comfort the hungry. But you suspect it was both. After all, fear and kindness have always been close cousins. You pour a handful of barley into a small bowl and set it on the windowsill. Just in case, you whisper. The wind sighs through the rafters. Not approval, not disapproval, just acknowledgement. And as you climb back into bed, the granary settles, its timbers groaning like an old man turning over in his sleep. Outside, the moon watches. Inside, the barley glows faintly, as if remembering your voice. When morning comes, the whole village smells like bread and wood smoke and relief. Today is harvest home, the end of toil, the beginning of stories. You step outside into a swirl of sound, fiddles, laughter, and the occasional drunken hymn. Children run through the barley stubble, clutching the last sheaf, tied with ribbons of red and gold. It's not just decoration. It's a relic, a piece of the year itself. They call it the corn mother, though it's made of barley. Your historical fact. The last sheaf tradition was common throughout medieval England. The final bundle of barley was believed to contain the spirit of the harvest. It was carried home in procession, sung to, sometimes even dressed like a woman, and kept until spring planting, when her spirit would be returned to the earth. You watch as the procession winds through the village. At the front walks the oldest farmer, hat in hand. Behind him, a gaggle of children wave sheaves like flags. A woman with a wreath of dried barley sings, her voice trembling with pride and exhaustion. You find yourself smiling. It's the closest thing this village has to a holiday, and somehow, it feels more sacred than any sermon. Your obscure tidbit. In some regions, people baked barley dolls, little figures shaped from dough made of the first and last barley harvested. They were hung near the hearth to protect the home from famine. And if mice nibbled at them, it was considered a blessing. The spirit is hungry too. By afternoon, the tables are piled with roasted vegetables, smoked fish, and barrels of ale that seem bottomless. Peg, somehow still alive, still pouring mugs with divine efficiency, raises a toast. To the barley that fills our bellies and our tempers alike. Everyone laughs, a few even tear up. The fiddler strikes up a tune that feels both ancient and oddly familiar. People dance, badly, beautifully, like those who know winter is coming but refuse to let it matter yet. You join in, because there's something contagious about joy that doesn't depend on plenty. Your feet find the rhythm, your hands find the air, and for a moment, history itself seems to dance along. Historians still debate whether the Harvest Home Festival was pagan in origin or a Christian adaptation. But standing here, with barley dust clinging to your shoes and laughter filling the sky, you realize it doesn't matter. Gratitude is older than religion. As the sun sets, someone carries the last sheaf into the church and lays it near the altar. A prayer is said, half joke, half plea. Bless us with less blight, fewer taxes, and barley enough to share. And as the candles flicker, you sense the entire village exhale. They survived another year. They will plant again. The barley will rise again. When you walk home through the quiet fields, the stubble gleams like gold teeth in the dusk. The wind hums, low and soft, and you can almost hear it say, "You did well. Sleep now." You wake to the sound of a quill scratching paper. It takes you a moment to realize it's your own hand, writing by candlelight. You've been trying to capture what barley feels like in words. It resists. Of course it does. The English tongue, you realize, is soaked in grain. Breadwinner, crust of the earth, barleycorn. The last one makes you pause. It sounds like a fairy tale character, but it's really a unit of measurement. 1/3 of an inch, roughly the length of a barley grain. Your historical fact. The entire English measurement system once rested on barleycorns. In the 13th century, King Edward I defined an inch as 3 grains of barley, dry and round, placed end to end. The whole empire eventually would run on barley. You grin. Somewhere, centuries later, a factory engineer measures metal with a precision born from a cereal crop. History has a sense of humor, and so does barley. You wander outside, notebook in hand. The fields are stubbled and brown now, yet still full of whispers. The old farmer beside you nods toward the horizon. Funny thing, he says. We speak of fields as if they speak back. You test that idea. You say the word barley out loud, and it sounds round, gentle, honest. You say wheat, and it feels sharp, ambitious, foreign. Barley rolls like a sigh. Wheat cuts like a knife. No wonder, perhaps, that England loved the first longer. Your obscure tidbit. Medieval poets used the phrase barley sleep to mean a deep, satisfied rest after a long day of honest work and full belly. It was considered the best kind of sleep, earned rather than stolen. In some tavern songs, even love was measured by it. She gave him barley sleep, not bitter bread. You wonder when we lost those phrases, when the language traded its warmth for utility. Maybe when people stopped touching the things their words described. When fields became yields and barleycorns became data points. Historians still debate whether medieval English had more words for grain than modern English. But you don't need a dictionary to know this. Every word spoken slowly, kindly, becomes a field. You write in your notebook, barley means patience. Then you close it, blow out the candle, and let the dark finish the sentence for you. If the barley was the heart of medieval England, ale was its bloodstream. And the ones who kept it flowing weren't monks or kings or soldiers. They were women, the aloes. You meet one in the village square, sleeves rolled up, hair frizzed from steam. Her name's Edith, though everyone calls her the widow tap. Her cottage smells of malt and mischief. She pours you a cup of cloudy ale, the color of late afternoon. It's slightly sour, slightly sweet, and tastes like someone tried to bottle the feeling of sitting by a warm fire after a cold day. Your historical fact. In medieval England, most brewing was done by women. Ale was a household necessity, cheaper than wine, safer than water. Aloes sold what they brewed, often from their front doors, marked with a broom or branch hanging outside. The medieval open sign. Edith wipes her hands on her apron and leans inconspiratorially. They say I use a spell, she says, lowering her voice. Truth is, I just know when the barley smiles. You glance at the bubbling mash pot and try not to laugh. You mean when it ferments? She winks. Aye. When it remembers what it was born for. Her confidence is magnetic. Every villager knows her, trusts her, sometimes even fears her. Not for witchcraft, but for the quiet power that comes from making something everyone needs. Your obscure tidbit. The foam that formed during fermentation was once called God's breath. Some aloes would whisper blessings into it, believing that good words made better ale. Others swore by dipping a wooden spoon carved during a waxing moon. A superstition no one admitted to taking seriously but few dared ignore. You sip again. It's earthy, comforting, with a warmth that spreads slower than wine but lasts longer. Edith sees your expression and smiles like someone who's just won an argument she hasn't said out loud. Barley doesn't hurry, she says. It teaches you to wait. You help her lift a bucket to the fire, and she tells you about her late husband, how he could never quite get the mash right. Too proud to listen to the grain, she says. Barley don't like pride. Outside, the rain begins soft, steady, approving. Inside, the air glows gold from the firelight. Historians still debate whether brewing was ever a sacred act in early England or just practical necessity. But you can tell it's both. The alewife doesn't pray to her pot. She converses with it. By the time you leave, your head feels light, your heart lighter. The broom over her door sways gently in the rain. And you think maybe magic is just patience with better marketing. You push open the tavern door, and the night greets you like a sigh. The air inside smells of wet wool, baked onions and barley ale, that sturdy perfume of English togetherness. Every table flickers with a candle stub, and every cup holds some version of Barley's ghost. The tavern, you realize, isn't a building. It's a state of mind. The alewife from before, Edith, is here too, of course. She's everywhere ale is respectable and slightly out of hand. She nods you toward the fire where a storyteller is warming up the room. He's got a voice like gravel soaked in honey and a face that looks carved by the very spoons they stir porridge with. He begins without preamble and the crowd hushes, mostly because they want to hear, but also because no one likes missing gossip. They say, he starts, that Barley kept England calm long enough to invent boredom. A ripple of laughter. You like this place already. Your historical fact. By the 14th century, alehouses in England weren't just drinking spots. They were the first unofficial town halls. Wills were read here, debts negotiated, gossip traded like currency. If you were poor, the tavern was your parliament. The man continues. He talks of knights who traded swords for tankards, of millers who measured honesty in pints, of widows who kept order with a ladle. Every story seems to start with barley and end with regret, but soft, sleepy regret, the kind that makes you hum instead of weep. Your obscure tidbit. In some medieval taverns, candles were measured against the pace of drinking. You paid for ale till the candle burns out. If the wick burned quick, well, so did your fortune. It's the origin of the phrase, burning the candle at both ends. You sip your drink. It's warm now, and you swear it tastes of history itself. Dusty, stubborn, sincere. The tavern murmurs. Someone's arguing about the king's new taxes. Someone else is singing off-key about a fox and a miller's wife. And at one table, a quiet scholar is writing something in Latin on scraps of barley paper. You drift closer. He looks up, pale eyes, ink-stained fingers. Do you believe, he asks suddenly, that a people are what they drink? You think for a moment. Then you answer, only if they brew it themselves. He smiles. Then England, my friend, is half courage and half hangover. Historians still debate whether medieval ale truly united people across class lines, or whether that's a rosy myth poured from hindsight. But standing here, among laughter and steam and stubborn joy, you suspect it's true enough. Outside, the rain keeps falling softly. Inside, you raise your cup, and the barley within seems to whisper, keep talking. I'll keep listening. Morning creeps back like a servant who overslept. You wake to the tavern's embers and the sound of someone sweeping. The alewife's broom, perhaps, the quiet rhythm of endings and beginnings. Outside, England is stirring too. Peasants in the lanes, monks in their gardens, nobles still tangled in sheets of silk. And over it all, barley waves in the fields. Unbothered, democratic, the same gold for every class. You decide to walk toward the manor, just to see the other side of the story. The Lord Steward meets you by the gate. He's polite, perfumed, and clearly trying not to look at your shoes. He tells you the manor grows wheat, not barley. Barley's for the people, he says, as if discussing weather. And yet, as you walk the estate, you spot barley sacks stacked by the kitchen door. You point. He blushes. For the servants, he mutters. Your historical fact. In medieval England, barley was the staple grain for the poor, while wheat was reserved for the upper classes. Wheat made fine white bread called manchet eaten by nobles. Barley made coarse brown loaves called maslin, eaten by everyone else. The difference was less about nutrition, more about status. The steward catches you eyeing the maslin loaves cooling on a window ledge. "They're hearty," he says, almost defensively. You take a bite. It's chewy, dense, honest. The kind of bread that stays in your mouth long enough to give your thoughts something to lean on. You joke lightly, "If truth had a flavor, it'd be barley." He smiles, but it's the kind of smile that says, "Please don't quote me in the village." Your obscure tidbit. Some medieval physicians believed barley bread cooled the body's hot humors, a medical term that basically meant bad moods caused by rich food and bad decisions. Wheat, by contrast, was thought to heat the blood and cloud the mind. So the poor, ironically, were seen as more balanced by diet than the rich. You can't help yourself. So, by that logic, you say, barley made better thinkers. The steward frowns. Careful. That sounds dangerously philosophical. He's not wrong. In a society built on hierarchy, any grain that equalized things, even quietly, was suspect. Historians still debate whether the English preference for barley among commoners helped shape the nation's later work ethic. Modest, patient, enduring. But walking back down the lane, past cottages with smoke curling from the chimneys and bread cooling on sills, you feel the answer more than you know it. Barley isn't heroic. It doesn't strive or shout. It simply shows up, season after season, and holds the country together one loaf, one cup, one story at a time. And perhaps that's why it was never glorified in the poems, never gilded in art. Because barley didn't need worship. It needed gratitude. You pause by a low fence and watch the wind ripple through the stalks. That same motion, ancient and unchanging, that once looked like prayer. Somewhere behind you, the tavern bells ring again. Seems England, like barley, never truly sleeps. You walk along the cloister path just as dawn folds itself across the abbey walls. The stones glow pale pink, and the air smells of wet hay and ink. Two things monks used more than sleep. You can hear the steady rhythm of chanting from the chapel and the even steadier rhythm of chewing from the refectory. Barley again. Always barley. Even in God's house, it's breakfast, lunch, and theology. You step inside the kitchen and find a monk bent over a steaming pot. He's stirring slowly, meditatively, as if expecting the Holy Spirit to answer through the bubbles. "Brother," you ask, "what are you making?" He glances up. "Porridge," he says solemnly, "and possibly salvation." You decide to stay. Your historical fact. In medieval monasteries, barley was a staple not just for meals but also for medicine. Monks believed it cooled fevers, soothed the stomach, and strengthened the spirit. One 13th century recipe for holy broth included barley, sage, and a prayer said 3 times while stirring clockwise. Brother Simeon, that's the monk's name, offers you a bowl. It's warm, plain, and somehow deeply comforting, like the culinary version of being forgiven. He tells you that they grow the barley themselves in the abbey fields, harvest it in silence, dry it beneath linen cloth, and store it in barrels marked with painted crosses. Barley, he explains, is humble enough for monks and generous enough for saints. It feeds both body and obedience. He murmurs, and you realize you've never heard anyone make a grain sound so devout. Your obscure tidbit. Some monastic manuscripts describe an odd practice called lectio granorum, the reading of the grains. When decisions troubled the abbot, the brothers would scatter barley on a table and interpret the pattern it made. Was it superstition? Maybe. Or maybe it was just faith shaped like curiosity. Simeon admits with a smile that sometimes they read too much into it. Once, he says, a novice spilled a bowl of barley by accident, and the abbot declared it a sign they'd sown too early. They waited, The next crop failed anyway. God, Simeon says, has his own sense of humor. Historians still debate whether monks truly believed in the prophetic powers of barley, or if it was simply a way to feel close to something alive during their silent routines. But standing there, spoon in hand, you think, maybe silence and superstition aren't so different when both are born from wonder. Outside, the sun spills across the abbey gardens. Bees hum among lavender, and the monk's sandals whisper over stone. It's a quiet, sturdy world, built not on gold or glory, but on grain and faith and endless, careful stirring. Before you leave, Brother Simeon presses a small bag of dried barley into your hand. For travel, he says softly, and for remembering what feeds you. You travel north, following the monks' barley roads, past hedgerows and slow rivers, until the fields give way to moors. Here, the wind feels older, like it remembers before names. Villagers live scattered, their roofs low and their ovens smoking even at dawn. One night, you stop in a small hamlet where everyone seems to be waiting for something. A woman in a shawl explains in a hush, "The barley star's rising." You look up, expecting something spectacular, but all you see is a faint shimmer near Orion, pale and tremulous. Your historical fact. In the late Middle Ages, some rural communities believed that certain stars predicted harvest success, and one, called the Barley Star, was thought to foretell both abundance and peace. It wasn't a real star, of course, but probably Spica, in the constellation Virgo, whose Latin name literally means ear of grain. They take it seriously here. A man in rough wool kneels in the field, pressing barley seeds into the earth one by one, murmuring what sounds like half prayer, half pledge. Another lights a torch and raises it toward the sky, whispering, "Shine steady." You ask what happens if the barley star fades. The woman shrugs. Then we live quieter, hungrier. Your obscure tidbit. Some English astrologers in the 14th century mixed Christian prophecy with old pagan lore. One claimed the barley star burned brightest in years when kings fall and crops rise. Another warned that, when Spica hides behind the cloud of Mars, barley will turn bitter in the mouth. It's a poetic way of saying, when war comes, even bread tastes wrong. You watch the villagers sing softly around their fields, the sound drifting like smoke. It isn't desperate. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic, a lullaby to the soil. Historians still debate whether the barley star belief was genuinely astrological or simply metaphor, a kind of rural poetry that gave people a way to make sense of the uncertain sky. Either way, you can feel it, the human need to see pattern in the stars to connect harvest and heaven. You tilt your head back. The barley star gleams faintly, unwavering. The wind sighs through the stalks, and for a moment it sounds like the earth exhaling. You realize this. Barley has always been a mirror. In it, people saw the heavens, their hunger, their gods, and their neighbors, all reflected in one small stubborn grain. As you turn to leave, the torchlight flickers behind you. Someone calls out, "Tell your children to plant when the barley breathes." You nod, pretending to understand. But as you walk away, you swear you hear it. A soft rustle beneath your feet, like the ground itself answering. You wake to the sound of cart wheels over stone. A low, rhythmic thunder that seems to hum the same tune as your heartbeat. You're on the Barley Road, or at least that's what the carter calls it. It winds from the fertile south toward the rougher northern markets, where barley buys everything from bread to promises. The morning fog clings to the hedgerows. The horse snorts, unimpressed by history, but you're awake enough to sense it in the air, the invisible map that barley drew before kings and clerks ever tried to. Your historical fact. By the 13th century, barley was one of England's most traded crops, linking villages, monasteries, and coastal ports. In good years, it was exported to Flanders. In bad ones, hoarded behind manor walls. Merchants called it soft silver, dependable, light, and worth its weight when the wheat failed. You ride with a merchant named Alfric, whose cart smells like malt and determination. He wears 3 tunics layered against the chill and talks like a man who's been cheated by every saint in the calendar. Wheat's for vanity, he grumbles. Barley's for life. You nod as if you've always known this truth. The road dips through a small hamlet, and people emerge like curious crows. Children barefoot, women in rough linen, men with hands shaped by scythes. They come not to buy but to look, to inhale that faint sweetness that rides the barley sacks. To them, this isn't trade. It's reassurance. The grain is moving, the world still works. Your obscure tidbit. Medieval carters had a superstition called feeding the dust. When setting out on a long road, they'd spill a handful of barley onto the track for good luck. A small offering to the road spirits, or maybe to the land itself, to keep the wheels turning. Some swore that if you forgot, your axle would break before sunset. Alfric does it, of course. He's a practical man, but he still believes in insurance policies of the spiritual kind. A small arc of golden grains scatters across the dirt, and he mutters, "There, that's the road's share." Historians still debate whether this ritual was pagan in origin or just a folk custom born from habit. But when you see how seriously Alfric tips his head to the earth, you understand. It's gratitude disguised as precaution. By noon, the road widens into a market town, loud with barter and gossip. Barley sacks change hands, measured not by scales but by trust and old reputation. A single grain escapes from one and rolls between your fingers, light as memory. You look up and realize something strange. Every story you've heard, from the monks, the Aloeves, the peasants, they all meet here in this quiet commerce. Barley connects them like thread through cloth. And maybe that's why England never quite unraveled, because the road itself, dusty and ordinary, kept everyone walking the same direction. Even barley, patient as it is, can fail. And when it does, the silence afterward feels biblical. The year is gray, every month gray. The sky sulks, the earth refuses to dry, and the fields smell of mildew instead of promise. You walk past a village where roofs sag and faces sharpen like blades. Someone coughs, someone curses the clouds. No one laughs. Your historical fact. In the early 14th century, England suffered the Great Famine, 1315 to 1317. Relentless rain drowned crops, and grain stores rotted. Barley, normally the survivor's grain, sprouted mold faster than it could be saved. Even the monastery's careful reserves ran low. You visit one such abbey. The cloister garden is mud, the granary echoing and bare. Brother Simeon, older now, stirs a pot of thin gruel that smells faintly of smoke and memory. He looks up. "We prayed for rain," he says softly. "We didn't specify when it should stop." Outside, a line of villagers waits for what little the monks can share. A woman clutches a child with eyes too large for his face. You hear no weeping, only the shuffle of feet and the sound of barley water ladled thin. Your obscure tidbit. During the famine, some English villages baked a strange bread called misericord loaves, made from crushed barley husks, bean meal, and ground acorns. They were nearly inedible, but believed to trick the stomach into quiet obedience. One chronicler even claimed they tasted of humility and bark. You taste one. He wasn't exaggerating. Still, the monks baked them daily, lining them on rough wooden boards like offerings. Barley, once symbol of comfort, now becomes endurance. Not delicious, but dependable. Historians still debate whether famine changed the class divide between barley and wheat eaters. Some say the crisis blurred it, others that it hardened it forever. When there's only enough grain for the Lord's table, mercy becomes a rumor. You see it in the village faces. Not anger, just exhaustion. Barley had always been enough, until it wasn't. The aloe's barrels are dry, the tavern silent, the barley road empty. And yet, here and there you catch small defiance. A child collecting stray grains from the mud. A farmer scattering seed too early, whispering, "Grow anyway." A monk saving one spoonful from his bowl to pour back into the soil. Barley will come back, you know. It always does. But when it does, it will be remembered differently, not just as food, but as the thing that once left and taught everyone what hunger really sounded like. The next morning, you wake to the faintest thing. The sun trying again. The wind smells less sour. Somewhere, a bird sings off-key. And you think, maybe that's how the world restarts, with small noises of hope disguised as ordinary days. The famine ended, but the land did not forgive quickly. The soil, exhausted, gave back in patches, as if testing whether humans deserved another chance. And yet, in these damp corners of recovery, something unexpected began to bubble again. Not bread this time, but ale. It started small. A few women in half-collapsed cottages, boiling grain in patched copper pots, stirring the old way by instinct and prayer. The smell was unmistakable, sour, sweet, alive. Barley reborn. Your historical fact. By the mid-14th century, England's recovery from famine was fueled, quite literally, by ale. With clean water scarce and wine too expensive, ale became the drink of rebuilding. Made from malted barley, it was safe, nourishing, and traded like liquid coin. Aloes, the women who brewed and sold it, became quiet pillars of recovery. You meet one of them on the edge of Norwich, a woman named Marjorie. She's tall, ruddy-faced, and constantly humming to herself, as if the tune helps the brew ferment faster. Her cottage is half alehouse, half kitchen, all chaos. Steam curls from a bubbling pot. Cats patrol the rafters. Coins jingle in a jar by the door. Marjorie laughs when you ask if she's rich. Rich? No. I'm busy. There's a difference. Your obscure tidbit. Aloes often placed a broom. Bristles up. Outside their doors as a sign that fresh ale was ready. It's one of the earliest shop signs in English history. Some scholars say it's also where the later witch's broom legend began. A house with strange smells, bubbling cauldrons, and a woman stirring secrets. Marjorie points to hers with pride. Best advertisement there is, she says. Broom up, bellies full. The barley in her brew came from the same fields that once starved her parents. She calls it forgiveness in a cup. And as you sip it, thick, nutty, faintly bitter, you taste that forgiveness too. It's not a noble drink, not a delicate one, but it's real and it steadies you. You wander the lanes that evening, watching how the smell of brewing seems to pull people out of doors. Men argue less, children laugh more. Even the monks, once austere, begin trading recipes with townsfolk. This is how civilization heals, not with proclamations, but with yeast and patience. Historians sometimes write that England rose on barley, and standing there warm from ale and hearthlight, you begin to understand how literal that might be. By the next summer, the famine is a story, not a sentence. The barley fields, greener now, sway like oceans of forgiveness. And as they ripen, villages begin to whisper about a new celebration. Something not in the old church calendar, but somehow older than it. It's called the Festival of the First Malt. No parchment decreed it. No priest invented it. It simply appeared like mushrooms after rain in villages across England. A day to mark the first malted barley of the year, when ale was brewed fresh and hope was declared officially drinkable again. Your historical fact. While not formally documented until later centuries, festivals celebrating the barley or harvest were common in post-famine England. These early feasts mixed pagan tradition, Christian blessing, and folk gratitude, blurring sacred and ordinary joy. The first barrels were tapped at dusk, and everyone, lord, peasant, monk, child, was invited to drink. You arrive in one such village as preparations begin. Garlands of dried hops hang from windows. Musicians test their fiddles. And in the square, a wooden barrel sits like an idol of survival. A boy guards it with a stick, glaring at any chicken or dog that dares approach. Your obscure tidbit. Some records mention that barley festivals included a peculiar ritual. Villagers would bake a loaf of barley bread shaped like a wheel and roll it down the nearest hill. Where it landed was declared the lucky field for next year's crop. This may be a remnant of old sun worship or just an excuse to chase bread downhill. Both equally English. At sundown, the ale is poured. The crowd cheers, and for a brief, golden moment, famine, war, and hardship are all forgotten. Everyone drinks from the same ladle. The air smells of roasted grain, sweat, and laughter. You sit beside Marjorie the alewife. Her face glows in the firelight as she lifts her cup and says, "May we never again drink in fear." Such a simple line, but it feels like scripture. The music swells. Someone spills ale onto your sleeve, and you think how strange it is that the world can end and begin again in the same small field. Barley, once a measure of desperation, is now a toast to endurance. And as the stars rise over the square, you realize the monks were wrong. Holiness doesn't just live in silence and prayer. It also lives here, in noise and warmth, in the patient rebirth of a crop that refused to stay gone. The next century begins with curiosity instead of crisis. England, once a land of famine and superstition, starts asking strange and dangerous questions, like why barley behaves the way it does when soaked, heated, or left to bubble in the dark. It's not theology anymore. It's chemistry, though no one dares call it that yet. You find yourself in Oxford, where the air smells faintly of ink, ale, and arrogance. A scholar in a worn robe leans over a pot of boiling wort. His name is Brother Allard, though his friends whisper the malt monk. He insists he's not making beer. It's a study in divine transformation, he says, stirring slowly, from grain to gold. Your historical fact. By the early 15th century, brewing had become a proto-science. Monasteries documented fermentation times, temperatures, and storage conditions in near-laboratory detail. The word yeast wasn't yet known. They called it God's breath. Brother Allard dips a wooden spoon into the bubbling pot and sniffs it thoughtfully. Then, as though explaining theology, he murmurs, "When barley dies, it rises again as ale. Does that not resemble resurrection?" It's hard to argue with that sort of logic. Your obscure tidbit. Some early monks believed malt could absorb astrological influences. They brewed under specific moon phases or planetary alignments, claiming that a barley soaked under Jupiter produced a more cheerful ale. Historians still debate whether this was science or just a convenient excuse for day drinking. Allard records every observation in a neat Latin script. Color, amber. Bubbles, plentiful. Odor, reminiscent of bread and forgiveness. He's building a theology of taste and, unknowingly, a foundation for modern brewing. You notice how his tools look almost medical. Scales, funnels, a glass tube stolen from an alchemist's bench. Each bubble in his cauldron is a tiny experiment. Each sip, a hypothesis. Outside the abbey, the townsfolk mock him. Brother Barley, they say, studying how to get drunk slower. But you sense something profound in his work. He's doing what humans always do when peace finally lasts too long, turning curiosity into ritual again. Historians still debate whether monks like Allard paved the way for later scientists, or whether their experiments were simply holy hobbies. Either way, it feels like the world's first gentle hum of progress, one kettle at a time. By now, the barley trade has outgrown its fields. Caravans roll from the Midlands to London, from London to Flanders, their wagons creaking with malt. Barley has become currency, more stable than coin, more beloved than kings. You stand on the wharf at Bristol as a ship loads its barrels, each one stamped with the mark of its brewer, a crossed sheaf, a monk's cowl, a carved broom. The sea air mingles with the malt smell until you can't tell where England ends and barley begins. Your historical fact. By the late 15th century, barley was one of England's most exported goods. Flemish merchants prized English malt for its strength and color. Dutch brewers used it in their new beer style, stronger and longer-lasting than ale. Barley wasn't just survival anymore. It was diplomacy in a barrel. The sailors argue over how many casks will spoil at sea. One swears that barrels made from oak in Devonshire never leak. Another insists the trick is to soak them first in seawater, to teach them humility. Your obscure tidbit. Medieval coopers, barrel makers, were often forbidden to marry during their apprenticeship. The logic. They'd have to travel constantly, and a cooper with a wife drinks more than he works. Records show, of course, that they drank plenty regardless. You watch as the barrels are sealed with pitch and rolled down the dock. One bursts open, spilling golden froth onto the boards. A sailor laughs, dips a finger, and licks it. England, he says simply. And it's true. This grain, humble, stubborn barley, now carries a country's reputation. Not its knights or kings or wars, just its patience, its taste, its quiet endurance. As dusk falls, you hear the dockhands singing. Bread for the belly, ale for the heart, barley for both, till death do us part. The song drifts over the water like a benediction. And as you watch the last ship disappear into the fog, you realize England has traded famine for faith in fermentation. The barley that once saved lives is now a symbol of life's pleasure itself. And in the rhythm of ship bells and soft surf, you can almost hear Brother Allard's voice. Resurrection in every pint. You wake to the sound of water, not rain, but the steady rush of a mill race. The dawn smells faintly of wet grain, smoke, and horse sweat. It's the 16th century now, and the English countryside hums with an unfamiliar rhythm. Industry, though no one calls it that yet. A great wooden mill will turns beside you, its paddles dark with moss. Inside, gears groan, belts squeal, and barley dust drifts through the air like soft golden smoke. You step in and see the miller, sleeves rolled up, eyes half closed in concentration, as though he's conducting an orchestra instead of a grindstone. He doesn't notice you at first. No one ever does. You move through centuries like a ghost with muddy boots. The miller mutters to himself, "Barley again. Always barley." He leans on his broom, sighs, and spits in the corner. They say wheat's for the gentry, but barley's what keeps the world turning. Your historical fact. By the early 1500s, watermills powered much of England's grain economy. Some villages were even required by law to grind their barley only at the Lord's mill, paying in kind, a portion of each sack called multure. It was a clever system. The lord grew rich, the miller stayed tired, and everyone pretended it was fair. The miller's son, a boy of 12, feeds the hopper with practiced boredom. You ask him what day it is. He shrugs. Market day, I think. Or maybe the day before it. Time in a mill runs by rotation, not by sun or sermon. Your obscure tidbit. Some millers used to place little carved faces or charms in the walls of their mills to appease the grinding spirits. A 1534 account from Yorkshire describes one such figure named Barley John, carved with a grin and said to keep the stones from jamming. Historians still debate whether this was genuine superstition or just an inside joke among overworked men. The floor trembles slightly beneath you. It's hypnotic, the endless churn of wheel and stone, wood and water. You understand why millers were often accused of madness or witchcraft. Anyone who listens to that rhythm long enough starts to hear voices in it. The miller wipes his brow and looks up at the sky. He doesn't pray, but he whispers something that sounds like gratitude or resignation. Maybe the two are the same thing. As evening settles, he bars the door, leaving you alone with the sound of the wheel turning endlessly, like history itself refusing to rest. The wheel keeps turning, and centuries blur. Now it's London. The river stinks faintly of tanneries and ambition. Smoke curls upward from breweries stacked along the Thames, and dockworkers roll barrels with the ease of men who've done nothing else their whole lives. You follow one, Thomas, a cooper's apprentice, down a narrow lane where the air glows amber from open brewery doors. Inside, the heat feels alive. Boiling kettles hiss like serpents, malt dust sparkles in the air, and men shout cheerfully over the din. Your historical fact. By the 17th century, small beer, a weak barley ale, was a staple of daily life. It was safer than water, consumed by adults and children alike. Some employers even paid part of their workers' wages in beer, measured out in jugs instead of coins. Thomas collects his day's portion, 2 clay mugs of barley ale, and raises one to you with a grin. "Can't trust the Thames," he says, nodding toward the window. "At least this river runs through you clean." Your obscure tidbit. Records from 1650 mention a London brewer who claimed his ale cured melancholy, gout, and bad dreams. He was later fined for false advertising, though his customers swore it worked for at least one of the three. You sip, and the taste is oddly comforting. Warm bread, faint sweetness, and a little bitterness that lingers like a thought you can't quite name. This is barley's quiet revolution. It has gone from survival crop to cultural currency, from muddy field to mug and song. A fiddler plays outside the brewery door, and the workers hum along. Bread fills the belly, they sing softly, but barley fills the soul. The evening light hits the barrels stacked by the wall, and you notice faint chalk markings. Numbers, symbols, initials. A brewer's language. A new kind of scripture, written not for monks or kings but for the working man. You think of Brother Allard and his theological brewing centuries ago. He'd probably smile to see it, the divine transformation complete. Grain to gold, indeed. As the night deepens, the songs fade into hums, and you feel the warm weight of the day settling into your bones. Barley has become more than food or drink. It's become England's heartbeat. Steady, resilient, and just a little tipsy. You awaken to the hiss of steam and the rhythmic clank of metal. Gone are the sleepy mills and wooden wheels. Now the air itself feels engineered, thick with soot, ambition, and something faintly metallic. You're in the 19th century. Barley still fills the fields, but the hands that harvest it now do so in the shadow of smokestacks. A train rumbles past, carrying freight marked with strange, stenciled words, Burton-on-Trent. Barley malt export. You follow the scent, sweet, roasted, comforting, until you reach a sprawling brewery that hums like a living creature. Men in rolled shirts shovel malt into steam-powered mashers, and brass pipes gleam like veins. Everywhere you look, barley is being turned into something new, something industrial and strangely holy. Your historical fact. By the mid-1800s, the English town of Burton-on-Trent became the brewing capital of the world. Its mineral-rich water produced a crisp, pale beer that revolutionized taste, pale ale. Exports boomed so much that by 1880, Burton breweries sent beer to India, Russia, and even Australia. Barley had become global. The foreman, red-faced and merry, slaps a barrel with pride. "This one's bound for Bombay," he says. "Keeps better than men do on the voyage." You smile faintly, half amusement, half melancholy. What began as a humble field crop is now an empire's quiet ambassador. Your obscure tidbit. Victorian brewers often employed beer tasters, men paid to sip from dozens of barrels each day. They were said to lose their sense of taste by 30 and their balance shortly after. One such taster in 1861 reportedly declared that beer should taste like a promise kept. Outside, trains whistle. Inside, barrels roll like thunder. The workers move with mechanical grace, feeding the beast of progress. No prayers, no songs, no old charms carved into the wood. Only the hiss of steam and the faint sound of money changing hands. Historians still debate whether this was progress or merely a new kind of servitude. But you can't deny the quiet awe of it. How a grain once crushed by hand now fuels a global thirst. Barley is no longer just a plant. It's a process, a machine that never sleeps. As dusk falls, the foreman lights a pipe and watches the smoke rise into the factory rafters. "Funny thing," he says softly. "My granddad used to thank the Lord for the harvest. Now we thank the schedule." And somewhere beyond the clamor, you swear you hear a faint echo of Brother Allard's voice. God's breath, he'd called it. Steam, after all, is just breath made visible. The machines fade and silence returns. You find yourself standing at the edge of a quiet English meadow. No factories, no wheels, no shouting men. Just wind brushing through barley that sways like an ocean of gold. It's evening again, as it always seems to be when stories end. You step forward, the stalks whispering against your hands. Somewhere, a skylark sings a few fading notes, and the sun hangs low and lazy, like it too can't be bothered to set on time. Your historical fact. Even today, barley remains one of Britain's most enduring crops. It's used for beer, whiskey, bread, and even animal feed. Its roots stretching deeper into daily life than perhaps any other grain in English history. Your obscure tidbit. Some old farmers still scatter a pinch of barley before sowing season, a gift to the field spirits. Most say it's just tradition. But one Suffolk farmer, when asked in 1972 why he still did it, smiled and said, "Because it's polite." The barley waves gently around you, patient, timeless, unimpressed by all the empires and machines that have come and gone. You think of every hand that's touched it. Monks, millers, brewers, farmers, sailors, tasters, poets. Each one turning it in their own way into sustenance and story. Historians still debate whether barley's dominance over wheat was purely economic, or whether it simply fit England's temperament better, hardy, adaptable, a little rough around the edges, but quietly enduring. You kneel and pick up a single stalk. It's warm from the sun, smooth in your fingers, impossibly light. Somehow it feels alive even though it isn't. You realize this isn't a story about agriculture at all. It's a story about patience. and about how sometimes the things that grow slowest last the longest. You probably won't make it through this evening, not because it's exciting, but because it's finally calm. So take a deep breath. Let the sound of the wind be your lullaby. Let the weight of the centuries soften into nothing. And as the last light fades across the barley fields, you hear the faint hum of a distant mill, the soft clink of a brewer's mug, the quiet gratitude of a monk who believed in transformation. It all dissolves into the same endless rhythm: grain to bread, barley to beer, life to sleep. Now, let's ease into stillness. The fields rest, the story sleeps, and so do you.